You may begin.
Wonderful. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Youth and Education Matters Committee. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Evans.
All of the SBDs to collect.
Alderman Page.
Present.
Alderman Stevens.
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Chairwoman Green.
Present.
For present, you have quorum.
Wonderful. Next, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the October 21st, 2021 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk, would you please call?
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Ingracia. Alderwoman Evans. Alderman Page.
Present.
Alderman Stevens.
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Chairwoman Green.
Aye.
One voted present and 3 aye votes.
Thank you. Today, we
Yes, may I revise my vote, please? I'm doing a little multitasking in another meeting at the beginning of this one. Revise my vote to aye, please.
So noted.
Thank you, Alderman Page. All right, today we have some special guests with us. We're first going to hear a presentation from SLDC, the impact of tax incentives on SLPS. We then will have some remarks from SLPS, and that will be followed by some public comment today as well. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Neil to take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Green. It's very excited to present today in front of the Education and Youth Matters Committee. I would like to say, as a lifelong resident of the city of St. Louis, it is my honor to be here today, as I know the youth are really at the center of our future as it relates to economic development. And the path forward from St. Louis Development Corporation as we aim to move our economic justice action plan forward. We really see the revitalization of all of our underserved areas and the partnership with SLPS and our other educational partners across the city critical to the future of economic development. So with that, if it's acceptable, I would love to share my screen to provide the brief presentation.
Yes, you should have the capabilities to do that.
Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes.
So again, as I stated in the opening, today, St. Louis Development Corporation will be sharing the economic development vision for the future, how SLPS and other educational partners will be a part of that journey, with also describing and outlining the ways in which SLPS is impacted by many of the development activities that happen in the city of St. Louis over the last 3 years, and definitely willing to answer any questions that may arise from the public or also from this committee. I would like to first start by presenting our Economic Justice Action Plan, which is currently underway and receiving public input. We have engaged the Council for Development Finance Agencies. They're a national agency that have extensive experience in not just economic development, but also social and racial justice, as that is a critical component to our equitable economic development framework. And our overall Economic Justice Action Plan is really focused on 4 key pillars on how we can provide equitable opportunity to thrive for all of our residents, businesses, and neighborhoods by addressing the historical barriers, economic inequities, and really understanding the focus on closing the racial wealth gap in the city of St. Louis. As we know, many of those inequities has hindered the growth of our city moving forward. So we have 4 key pillars in which we are moving this work forward. That's really around workforce development, investing in the capacity building of our youth, unemployed and underemployed residents to ensure that they have access to the workforce of the future. As we are embarking on several new developments in the city of St. Louis, from NGA to MLS, to many of the areas in which we're looking at neighborhood development in North St. Louis City, in areas of Southeast St. Louis that are considered our qualified census tracts by HUD. HUD defines those qualified census tracts as areas that are at 60% of the area median income or below, or have a poverty rate at 25% or more. And so all of these 4 pillars are focused on addressing the barriers in those qualified census tracts. The second key pillar here is business empowerment, building an ecosystem for our women and minority-owned business enterprises to access capital, technical assistance, mentorship, sponsorship, and networking opportunities, not only to enter into their industries, but also to grow and sustain their businesses long-term, allowing them to scale, build wealth, and hire employees from the city of St. Louis. We also are focused on neighborhood transformation, and that requires us to build the capacity of those neighborhood-based organizations and community development corporations that support many of our qualified census tracts, again, which I defined earlier, to ensure that the individuals, the residents, the families that live within these communities are not displaced. They have access to build wealth through home ownership, entrepreneurship, and we're building a career-oriented transit system. The final key component to that is equitable development principles, which we will go into more depth during the presentation. But as we have seen investment in our central corridor, downtown, and plans to be able to expand that development across the city, how do we leverage this real estate development to really drive a robust and resilient economy through equitable, transparent, and accountable incentive models that meet the but-for test, ensure that community benefit agreements are in place within all of our redevelopment agreements with real estate developers and businesses that are looking to locate in the city of St. Louis. As the mayor laid out her vision for economic development and economic justice, as she was running for mayor and now currently sits as the mayor, she laid out a plan of us being active partners in negotiations with developers and with businesses. And that's exactly what we're planning to do as we move forward. And we've already made some progress toward that. The most, I think, impactful way that we can address many of the barriers that we have is by bringing SLPS to the table as we're negotiating many of these contracts and having these negotiations with developers that are looking to locate in the city of St. Louis. Because we want to ensure that they have a place, that we are not having a detrimental impact, but having a positive impact on the growth of St. Louis public schools, not only on the growth of the schools themselves, but ultimately the students in which we're working together to serve. And this was proved out in our latest equitable development and community benefit practice that we enter into with Deli Start. Deli Start is a meat manufacturer that was relocating from Illinois into the city of St. Louis with the focus on creating over 475 new jobs with average wages of $65,000 or more. Because they were seeking a personal property tax abatement, which would have an impact on future revenue that could potentially flow to the city of St. Louis and ultimately to the St. Louis public schools. We put a community benefits plan in place. This was the first time in history that the SLPS Foundation and a business that were looking to locate to St. Louis enter into such a MOU through a community benefits agreement. This community benefit agreement included workforce development training, in which Deli Star will host a 2-day special SLPS edition of their Deli Star program. This included also employment opportunities. conducting hiring activities that require Deli Star to provide first source employment for any SLPS graduate at the age of 18 or current student. We also Deli Star also committed to promoting the SLPS Foundation, making a cash contribution themselves to the foundation, but also providing opportunities for many of their vendors and their partners that they work with to contribute to SLPS as well. And so this is just one example on how we are being more of an active partner with many of these businesses and developers that are looking to locate to the city of St. Louis, to not take away from our students, not take away from our school district, but actually enhance the mission of the St. Louis Public Schools and the city of St. Louis vision for closing the gap and providing economic justice. As we look at our tax abatement project summary, over the last 3 years, for the projects that have over fiscal benefit estimated over $1 million, we anticipate that there will be a contribution of $13.6 million to the St. Louis Public Schools within a 10-year timeframe. And over a 20-year timeframe, these projects will produce an additional tax revenue to St. Louis Public Schools of $89.5 million. And this is net new income that will be coming to SLPS through these projects. This has no impact on the base that these projects will, that these properties and this land was already producing for the St. Louis Public Schools. This is in addition to. So as we are looking to make investment, we are ensuring that these projects meet the but-for test. The but-for test is being determined as but for these tax incentives, these projects would not be able to be financially feasible or underwritable. But also we want to ensure that we have community benefit agreements in place during this time frame to ensure that as we are closing and working with these projects, they are providing a public benefit in return for this public investment that we are making. Again, this public investment is simply us foregoing potential tax revenue that would net new tax revenue that would come into SLPS or to the city of St. Louis in return for a public benefit in the long-term project revenue, as you can see here, to the city of St. Louis. And as it relates to tax increment financing projects, over the last 3 years, we have approved 3 new projects, 2 of them in 2019 and 1 in 2020, which was actually on Delmar. And we anticipate within a 10-year time frame, those projects will generate a net new revenue to SLPS of $940,000 and a net new revenue to SLPS over a 20-year period of $6.44 million. And again, this is all above what SLPS in the city was receiving from these projects before these actually placed in service. So again, I just wanted to present today our new vision for St. Louis Development Corporation around how we are advancing economic justice through equitable development principles, but also providing greater access to opportunity for all of our residents and more specifically our youth, which are at the center of the growth for us. I would also like to point out and thank the St. Louis Public School Board for allowing St. Louis Development Corporation to present to their board last month and present these numbers, as well as their continuous engagement with us as we continue to be more active partners with developers. SLPS will be a strategic partner in our economic justice action plan that will roll out in Q1 of 2022. And we have also engaged from SLDC to become a member of the citywide engagement plan that SLPS is undergoing to ensure that many of the principles that they are rolling out, we have embedded into our principles and actions. And as we are aiming to create more economic opportunity, address the population decline that we've had in the city of St. Louis since the 1950s, and ultimately bring revenue back to the school district and to the tax base, to the city, to ultimately help us all grow together. I'm excited about the partnership and excited to have them at the table with us. So with that, that concludes my presentation for today. I really, again, appreciate the opportunity, Chairwoman Green, to present, and definitely look forward to answering any questions that anyone may have today.
Thank you so much. We'll go through the committee now and see if any committee members have questions. Start with, is Alderwoman Ingracia here? I don't think so. Alderwoman Howard? Alderwoman Evans?
I have no questions at this time, maybe later. Did you hear me?
I believe Madam Chair has frozen. If Madam Vice Chair would like to take over the proceedings.
What's going on?
Alderwoman Evans, Chairwoman Green has just messaged us to let us know that she has indeed frozen. So as the Vice Chair, who now presides over the committee, would you like for us to pause while she reconnects, or would you like to move forward?
And I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again, Alderman Stevens?
Yes, ma'am. So Chairwoman Green has texted us to say that she's frozen, reconnecting. As the Vice Chair, would you like for us to pause, or would you like to continue the meeting?
Well, we can continue the meeting. Let's see who's Alderwoman Schweitzer, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Richardson, for that presentation. I know we spoke via email about a recent bill that was in front of the board to hear about the St. Louis Public Schools and how they'd be affected by it. And I really appreciate you taking that so seriously. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you look at the but-for clause? You know, what exactly is that? Does that mean? Just to give us some more background on that.
Yeah, sure. So I come from a banking background. So if I become very jargony, please stop me at any moment to explain any of these intricate details. But typically, as we review a project, we require a project budget from a developer, as well as a pro forma or a schedule of operations for that development project to help us understand the cost of the construction or that development project, but also be able to assess the return on which that project will generate over the time period in which they will receive an abatement. After we perform our analysis, we're able to calculate an internal rate of return, an estimated internal rate of return of what that project will benefit over that period of time. And so, for example, if a project, a mixed use project, residential and commercial, was producing a 4% return without abatement, but with abatement, it now produces a 6.5% return. And the market shows at a low end, we are able to look across our entire city around the market rate and the internal rate of return that a comparable project would be able to benefit from and get investment to. We then be able to understand that by closing that gap, by creating that extra 2.5%, now that project is financially feasible to meet underwriting criteria by bank and other investors. However, without that additional benefit, that project may not be financially feasible to actually get completed. I think that's critically important for us to understand that hurdle rate for us internally, but also work with the developer and their financing partners to understand how do we get this gap closed. And the reason why that's important is because if we are not able to close that gap, these projects don't happen. And if these projects don't happen, many of that additional revenue that could be generated by SLPS, the additional jobs that can be created by many of these projects are no longer available to the city. And so that's how we usually calculate the but-for test to ensure that the project itself does not receive a return that's higher than what the market would bear or would be financially feasible. So we usually underwrite the tax abatement to that amount of what the market will bear. One thing that we are putting into place is clawbacks. So if the developer was to sell the project between 5 to 10 years, depending on the time of the abatement that we've allowed, we would claw that back. Because what could typically happen in those scenarios is that the developer would capitalize their tax abatement, and that could be received as a profit to that developer. And so we want to ensure once that property is sold, that the tax abatement, the investment the city makes is returned above the rate in which we deemed approved or acceptable. So we have put some of those clawback measures in place for similar redevelopment agreements.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know in the one we just talked about at the Board of Aldermen that involved the target development, the thing that was hard for me to wrap my head around, it's like I understand there was like a 5.4%. That was what was sort of talked about, what the market could bear as the rate of return, if I remember that number correctly. And it's hard because, you know, we're looking at a company that has billions of dollars. And it's hard to wrap your head around them really needing St. Louis tax money to build something that will be profitable to them. And I think that I'm just
So that,
perhaps I'm not a very good capitalist, because there's part of me that's wondering, you know, they're going to make money off of this. Time will pass and they'll make money and they have billions of dollars, and, you know. So
that rate of return, I'll say a couple of things there, if I may. So that rate of return is really based on the developer itself. So the developer's return for the actual lease of that retail space, in addition to the leases of the residential space above that target. And so that is where that rate of return was calculated from. But in addition to that, the number of jobs, the new jobs that were being created by the target was significant, but also the developer itself agreed to put in 10% units of affordable housing, 5% at 60% AMI and 5% at 80% AMI. That was critically important for us to negotiate, because it's very important for us to understand that if we have workers that are making between $35,000 to $40,000 a year, that they have the ability to take advantage of those residential units within that development as well. And so with the incentives, that development project came out to about 5.2% of a rate of return, but without that incentive, it was closer to the high 3.8, 3.9% rate of return. And that's the overall risk of that development project. And that also includes the infrastructure, so lighting, sewers, the stoplights and others that are being placed inside of that district, in that area, is also being paid for by the developer. And that's why we were comfortable accepting that tax abatement on this project, because they were putting forth affordable housing within it, but also improving the infrastructure. So there was significant public benefit added into this project. In addition to that, we also are partnering with Target and Urban League to be able to bring forth opportunities for employment through Urban League Slate, and look forward to working with SLPS on this as the developer finalizes the lease with Target.
I appreciate all that information. I was definitely on the fence on that one before I got more information from you, and it's very clear how hard you're working to make sure that St. Louis is not losing out on these deals, which I feel like there are some that you can look back on that it's just amazing that what we gave and what we got. So I really do appreciate that, and I think that we have to be thinking about how every development is going to affect our schools positively, negatively, how it's going to affect our city positively, negatively, what we're going to get from it. And we definitely need development and we need to compete. And we, more than probably almost anything, need to have schools that are doing well. And so I feel like that always has to be something that is our first priority. And I appreciate that how much time you're spending thinking about it. All right, well, no further questions. I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And my apologies, my internet keeps going in and out, so I keep getting kicked off, but I appreciate Alderwoman Evans for stepping in if it happens again. Hopefully it won't. I restarted the router. So I think Alderman Stevens is next.
Yes, and I do have some questions, if that's okay. And Madam Chair, if I might request, if I start to break up myself or I start to lag, would you please interrupt me and stop me? Because no one wants to suffer through that.
Yes.
So, okay, am I currently coming through okay?
Yes, we can hear you right now.
Okay, and hearing me is better than seeing me, let me tell you. Director Richardson, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your presentation. I do appreciate both. I do have a question. And this, I will say that I come from public libraries, certainly not banking, so this may be out in left field, but one of the reasons why we give tax abatements is so that businesses can have their loans underwritten, correct?
That is portion of it is, it helps with the overall debt service coverage ratio. So the tax abatement period, it reduces the overall operating expenses for that project, which ultimately has greater income for them to cover any of their interest and principal payments through that time period.
Excellent. One thing that I've been impressed by your office about is the prioritizing, not just the I-4, but the prioritizing of equity and looking at sort of these systems that are in place to benefit one people over another, right? We see that with your 4 pillars: the workforce development, business empowerment, neighborhood transformation, equitable development principles, so on and so forth. And I guess my question, this is the left field part, is there anything that the Development Corporation or that your office is doing or that the city at large is doing to look at the loans that we are essentially enabling to be underwritten by way of giving tax abatements? Are we perhaps, allow me to rephrase, Director, are we perhaps supporting what absolutely could be argued as a corrupt or faulty system by allowing these tax abatements and essentially defeating ourselves in our goals of equitable development principles and neighborhood transformation?
Yeah. So I would say the most financial institutions have very stringent regulations that are federally regulated by OCC, U.S. Department of Treasury, and others, in which they have to have fair practices of lending. I would say that we are focused on ensuring that the incentives that we provide are equitable across the entire city of St. Louis and not just certain areas. However, we have seen a large amount of our development happening in certain parts of the city. But what I would say is I wouldn't say we were enabling any kind of predatory lending or providing additional to support to lenders. They have very stringent practices that were not regulated, obviously, by the city or by SLDC by any means, but they're federally regulated, and there's oversight from the federal government, U.S. Treasury, and the OCC. Our goal is to ensure that the projects, as we are evaluating them, are not receiving returns that are outside of the market on behalf of on the back of our tax abatements. So we want to ensure that if the hurdle rates that we deem are appropriate are not met, then we will help that developer or assist that developer in closing that financing gap. But it should not be above and beyond closing that gap. I have also communicated to developers that SLDC and tax abatement should be the last source. It should be the last resort of capital that goes into their structure. So they need to have their debt lenders up front. They need to have their other equity investors in the game with skin in the game before the city is putting up dollars or providing any tax incentives. So that's part of our evaluation process. We review those lending documents and agreements to understand those terms to ensure that they are within market. And we also ensure that we don't provide any tax benefit or abatement that isn't sufficient to closing that gap to get the project completed at a rate of return that we deem is at market value.
Okay, excellent. And thank you for the response. I'll say that's my my Costco train of thought there, my Costco chicken train of thought, where you can buy a chicken at Costco, but their company makes a point to ensure that the companies that they're getting their sources from, in this case chickens, are free range, taken care of, so on and so forth. So that was sort of my thought there, and I appreciate the thorough response, as well as the continued eye and prioritizing of equity across the city. I don't have any further questions. I will say that I wish the city were in a position, and I hope that the city is approaching a position where we can be more aggressive with our negotiating. I absolutely applaud the results that your office has so far produced. But with your example of Deli Star, I mean, a one-time $2,500 donation to the SLPS Foundation, that's the cost of doing business, That is, I would be curious to see what 1 week of revenue for the Deli Star would be. And then the intent to implement a roundup at the register, I'm very apprehensive of those sorts of deals. And that's just I want something more tangible, like, oh, we intend to do this. And I think Americans across the country have been told many a thing by corporations, small and large, that they intend to do and that they will do, and that we never ultimately see. But that said, I do appreciate your modernization of our St. Louis Development Corporation. I was very impressed with the Foundry TIFs and tax abatements with those board bills, and I believe in your 4 pillars. So your 4 pillars have my support, Director Richardson. And at the risk of rambling, I will cut myself off there. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Stevens. I will go to Alderman Page, and then Alderwoman Ingrassi has joined us, so I will go to her after Alderman Page.
Thank you, Chair Green, and good afternoon, everyone. I don't have any poignant questions, but I thought I would offer a couple of comments. I've had an opportunity to see Mr. Neil Richardson's focus on economic justice in development up close and personal. I had the pleasure of working with him and his team, as well as members of the city administration, to work out a deal on development of the Butler Brothers building on Olive Street, that 1 square block building that we've driven past all of our lives, essentially. And that deal ended up with some of the components he was just describing. Number one, it did require some tax incentives to get the deal closed, but they were creative. There was a sliding scale tax incentive that had a reduced amount of incentive in the out years. Another thing that was negotiated in the deal was what we call workforce housing, that had a certain percentage of the housing that was not specifically low income, but it was reduced income based on an AMI number. So I've seen his commitment to economic justice and development, and being judicious in offering tax incentives. I've seen that up close and personal. Mr. Richardson, anything else you'd care to share about that project to make the points you've offered earlier?
No, I think Alderman Page, you hit the nail on the head. It's really leveraging these projects similar to the Butler Brothers. And thank you again for your support and being at the table with us. I don't think we'd have been able to get that deal done without you being able to help referee some of those tough negotiation points. But we really were able to negotiate a sliding scale where the first 5 years were at 95%, second 5 years were at 75%, and the last 5 was at 50% of tax abatement. And we did that sliding scale because, as many people may know, over time, those projects begin to appreciate, and then assessed value begins to appreciate. So we wanted to ensure the initial investment period of the 5 years, which were most critical to stabilizing that project, getting it leased up, that developer had the opportunity to feel comfortable of covering their debt service, which I mentioned earlier, some of their interest and principal payments while they were leasing up. But then over time, that will begin to taper off as that development project becomes more sustainable, and more revenue will ultimately flow to the St. Louis Public Schools and to the city taxing districts as well. And so that's one way that we were creative, but also during that time period, we wanted to have workforce housing. 10% of the projects, 2% of the units were at 80% AMI, and the other 10% were at 120% AMI. And that was critical to ensure that no matter how well the project may do over time, that we will always have inclusive and accessible housing in that area, but also that those tenants within that property are able to access the other amenities that are coming to that area, such as the MLS Stadium, the other shopping and retail centers that will surround the MLS Stadium. And so our goal at St. Louis Development Corporation is to create mixed income, mixed use developments in neighborhoods to decentralize poverty, but create opportunities for economic mobility through many of these development projects. And really leveraging these development projects from the Butler Brothers to the Daily Star really as the economic engine to drive economic justice forward within our city, and being able to invest many of those dollars into areas that have been historically underserved and disinvested. So again, Alderman Page, very appreciative of your support, your collaboration, bringing SLDC to the table, the developer to the table, and said, let's work out a deal. It has to work for everybody. And that's really what we want to create as a win-win approach for the city and for the development team.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And while I'm offering thanks, thank you so much for the work you do for the city through SLDC. I sincerely, personally appreciate your support of development projects, equitable development projects in the fabulous Fifth Ward. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Alderman Page. I'll now go to Alderwoman Ingracia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you, Neil. Thanks for joining us today. Just wanted to echo most of my colleagues here. It's been a breath of fresh air to have you at the helm at SLDC. A few aldermen have worked kind of in a piecemeal way on their own to try and put forth deals similar to the ones that you are putting before us now. And I can't tell you how much I value your office taking the lead on that. It just makes our jobs much easier in terms of negotiating with developers. I think it's more fair to developers to be getting the same answers from SLDC, not just based on what one alderman thinks and another one does. And I was curious, I am proud of the work we did on Daily Star and some of these other things you've mentioned. They are community benefits agreement adjacent, but not quite CBAs. Are CBAs something that you're discussing as a part of your economic justice planning?
Yeah, so our goal is to have more formalized, and thank you for those remarks, Alderwoman Garcia. Our goal is to formalize community benefits, have clear principles, processes, and policy on how we think about affordable housing, accessible housing, workforce development, neighborhood transformation, all of the pillars that I laid out. But in the interim, we wanted to ensure that we were no longer just being a passive partner, but being an active partner in these transactions. And so we've had some of those one-off kind of negotiations with developers that had to come in the form of MOU. So the Daily Star project actually came in the form of an MOU between the SLPS Foundation and Daily Star directly. Again, I really appreciate the support of Dr. Adams as well as the SLPS board coming to the table with innovative ideas and solutions to work with Daily Star. Again, our goal at SLDC is not to be the lone voice at the table, but for SLPS to interact directly with those developers and those businesses, because their students are being the most impacted, their bottom line is being impacted by these development projects. So they need to be at the table. I've had direct conversations with Dr. Adams as well as Chairwoman Roberts about how do we create more transparency and accountability in the process. And as part of that redevelopment agreement that SLDC signed with Daily Star is if the terms of that MOU isn't met, those tax incentives can be clawed back. And that is critically important because that creates accountability there. So if they don't perform those practices such as the training, the workforce development, and even some of the contributions to the SLPS Foundation that they made, we will have the authority to claw back those tax incentives and any abatements that were provided to that to Daily Star. So we have some accountability measures in place. I have begun to revamp the SLDC incentives team to be more focused on these equitable development principles, as well as hiring a consultant that will be critical to reviewing and analyzing these incentives on a larger scale and providing us with greater support to be able to really become innovative and a leader in the nation around how we think about community benefits and the incentive models that we provide.
Great. Last question, and I'll stop bothering you. I know that it can be confusing, the but-for clause thing, and I joined the meeting right when that conversation was starting. So there are two ways you can receive abatement, right? Chapter 100 and Chapter 353.
Well, I would say there are several. I say Chapter 100 is really the sales tax exemption on construction materials. So it's being able to reduce the sales tax, reducing any sales tax that would go on construction materials. Chapter 99 is the real estate tax abatement that happens on properties themselves. And then Chapter 353 is a master development in which a entity or developer has the right to provide tax abatement that was approved by the board for a particular segment of the city or district of the city of St. Louis. Currently, we only have, and Zach, please correct me if I'm wrong, 353 that's in existence with SLU Midtown, but we may have one or two others.
We got
that
Cortex and Grand Center also.
Right. Okay. But they are coming off along with the TIFs. Yeah.
Okay, so do all state statutes require a but-for test on abatements?
No, that's an analysis that we have to conduct internally here at St. Louis Development Corporation.
So right now, as developments are moving forward, are you using the same model regardless of if a but-for test is required or not?
So we use the model to evaluate if the project actually meets the but-for test. So we put the projects through the incentive model, and when we do that evaluation, we're able to calculate a return on which the developer or business would generate from this project. We then look at the market for comparable businesses or developments to ensure that that rate of return is not above what we deem as the average market rate. And so anything above that market rate, we would not approve any tax abatement or incentive above that stated rate. And so when we present these projects to the Board of Aldermen or to the HUD's committee, we lay out that data and information and provide the but-for test recommendation, as well as any other community benefits that are part of these development projects.
Great. Thanks so much again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alderwoman Ingracia. I have just a couple of questions as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Richardson, for coming before us today. It's really appreciated. And like so many of my colleagues have stated, it's been a breath of fresh air working with you in your office and seeing the city take more of an active role in negotiations in a lot of these deals. And I really appreciate that. You know, several times today you've mentioned, you know, bringing SLPS to the table. So I just want to dive in a little bit more about what that could look like. You know, obviously SLPS has some seats on the TIF commission, but if it is not a TIF that is coming through, they don't have that same level of voice. Are there other ways that that you envision being able to have SLPS have more of a seat at the table in some of these negotiations?
Yes, and that was a direct conversation that I've actually had with Dr. Roberts, chairwoman of the board of SLPS, about this directly, and bringing them into the room when we're having these contract negotiations with developers, helping them understand how we are calculating and meeting that but-for test, and also understanding the amount of revenue that the SLPS school would be foregoing in a certain time period, but also helping them realize over a certain time frame in the window, they would reap additional benefits and have a positive impact on their overall revenue stream. So that's ways in which we're aiming to bring them to the table. I know Zach Wilson, our new senior incentives manager, has been here for several years, but he's been promoted to our senior incentives role, has provided the data, the incentives calculations to Dr. Adams previously for some of our projects as we provide any tax incentives. And the goal is for us to engage with Dr. Adams, the staff and administration, but as well as the school board, and keeping them abreast of these projects as we're negotiating them through the process, but also moving them forward to legislation. And so that is ways in which we're aiming to improve. It was prior to my administration, it was more of an informing. Right now, it's bringing them to the table to help us be accountable and responsible for meeting the goals of the St. Louis Public School Board, the school district itself, and also our overall economic development process. But I'll pass it over to Zach to see if he has any additional color or context to add to that process.
No, I would say Neil covered most of the bases, but on all data or all projects, we score how much they would cost the school district and how much revenue that would bring in. And we send that information out to the school district before the meetings, before HUDs or neighborhoods meetings. But in the future, we'll bring the St. Louis Public Schools to the table sooner and more often, I would say.
Wonderful, thank you. Definitely appreciate that, and that sounds like a very positive move in the right direction. Other question I had was regarding sort of what Alderwoman Ingracia was alluding to. So there's a new term that I'm starting to try to use for CBAs that aren't really CBAs, and that's, you know, a public benefit agreement, because I think, you know, CBAs have to be community negotiated, not negotiated by government or elected officials or people from SLDC, actually by community members being in that driver's seat. But when these public benefit agreements, like the MOUs that you were describing, are negotiated, what is the compliance for that look like? Because historically, the city tells people to do a lot of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that they follow through, or we follow through in holding people accountable. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Definitely. I think that's a very critical piece of this equitable development work, is to hold people accountable, including SLDC and my staff as well here, to ensuring that the things that we negotiate and agree to, these are legally binding contracts. These redevelopment agreements are, and any exhibit that's attached to that redevelopment agreement is legally binding. And this is a partnership that the city is creating with the developer or the business. And if one side does not perform its responsibilities, we have the right to say that that's a breach of contract. And the point of breach of contract, we have a right to claw back or pull back any tax incentives that were offered for that project as it relates to them meeting their public benefit. So again, that helps us hold them to greater accountability. Two of the things that we are really starting to do is beef up our compliance and management within our internal staff here at SLDC, but also hiring and bringing on a consultant that has experience across the real estate industry. So to be able to perform some of those audits and analysis on those financial statements and ensuring that those other public benefits are being met as aligned in our legal agreements with these developers. So that's part of the process that we're going through right now. We've already put forth a request for qualifications that was closed out in November to procure development, municipal financial advisors for development. And so we are currently in contract negotiations with a consultant right now that's a national partner that can bring us that level of support, not just on the front end, but also through the compliance period for these tax abatements. Because we know at SLDC, we have a limited number of staff, but we can really leverage those consultant partners who have not just more capacity, but also greater expertise of what's happening, not only in St. Louis, but across the country around real estate development. And so we're moving forward with procuring a consultant to perform those activities.
Okay, that is also really good news. Couple of questions regarding just the but-for test, and this might be a little bit in the weeds, but there are a couple of ways to look at but-for. One is to look at it through the lens of, if not for this incentive, this particular project would not happen. Another way to look at it is, without this incentive, no project would happen on that site. So not necessarily that particular project that is proposed, but that another development that could potentially also have a good use for that site could happen there. Is that factored into your but-for test at the moment, or is it strictly project specific?
No, we do evaluate that. And I know, Zach, you have within the model a certain replacement period in which it would take for us to identify a project that could potentially produce a similar revenue for the city or greater. But I think part of it is us evaluating not just if this project is feasible, but also if we forgo this project today, if it takes us 5 to 10 years to find a replacement project, we are also losing that opportunity to gain any additional tax revenue that we could have, again, because the tax abatement is above the base that we're already receiving. It's just a tax abatement on anything that's net new to the value of the property. So Zach, I'll let you dive a little deeper into that actual replacement number that we review.
No, you're correct. We do look at the replacement value. So sometimes if a project scores like it can be replaced in 2 or 3 years or even 7 years, we would score that lower because we could wait on another project to come. But the project scores, it would take 15 to 20 years for a project is something similar to come. That's when we would we'll encourage this project to proceed. So.
And sort of similar to that, when developers are submitting their proposals to SLDC, are we now requiring that they submit to you the same documentation that they are sending to their lenders, to make sure that they're not sending rosy projections to the lender and dire projections to the city?
Yeah, so again, I'll let Zach dive a little deeper into that. But yes, we are an investor into this development project, and that's really the communication that's coming from SLDC on behalf of the city is, if you're seeking tax abatement or tax incentive, we are now a lending and investment partner into this project, and we need to be treated as such. So any financial documents that are needed for us to perform our analysis, we need to have that information. And again, I think that's why it's very important for us to have a third party consultant to really help us evaluate and do the due diligence on not just a singular project, but look across the whole industry. If we have residential, a mixed use residential project in the city of St. Louis, what is the cost of that in the city across those other similar projects, not just tax abated projects, but across the board and also across the country? And so it helps us really get a better understanding of the average construction costs for particular units, particular type of properties, and really do our due diligence on a deeper level. But I know Zach right now, through his model that he runs, has some of that built into it as we are looking to revamp our overall incentive modeling process. So Zach, I'll defer back to you.
The way it's set up now, we do look at the complete capital stack, but with the third party, hopefully we'll have here in the next few months, will help us cover more bases, do more of a more thorough background of the project. So we do look at the complete capital stack, what they're working with, but with a third party, it will be more in depth, and another set of eyes is always good to look at the project. So. Great.
Those are all the questions I have. I do notice that Alderwoman Boyd has her hand raised, and so I'd like to ask her to chime in real quick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, SLDC and SLPS. And I just want to make a statement, because I keep hearing, and I've been hearing ever since I've been down at the board, about the TIFs and how it's the corporate welfare and how people are benefiting in certain communities and not others, and how the Board of Education is not benefiting. And so I don't see that it's happening, because maybe a lot of people on this call don't realize my community doesn't benefit from that. We don't get any of that, those benefits or perks in our community. And so I want to thank Neil Richardson and his staff, because they have come in and changed the dynamics of SLDC. And so now they're starting to look at North St. Louis. And that's a positive to me, because that's never happened before. And so it's come to a point where he's changing the thinking of how development is being done, and how the communities that these TIFs were created for are now going to benefit from it. Because maybe people on this call don't realize it, but my community was the one that's how TIFs was created for, because we was the poor communities, and we needed the TIFs to ensure that we got the developers in. So I want to recognize Neil, and I know he constantly gets the kudos and he gets the strokes. But, I guess it makes a difference when you have somebody that's come from those communities and they see how those people have struggled to try to bring themselves up, and all the dollars and perks were pulled from them. So thank you, Neil, for what you do. And thank you for being patient with everybody, because it's new to everybody. And so I applaud you and your staff for trying to help that community that these TIFs were created for. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Boyd, I really appreciate, again, your support and you bringing the business community to the table from your ward of saying this is exactly what we need around infrastructure, other support, and other resources to advance economic development forward in areas that have historically not seen that type of investment. And so that's really our focus is how do we leverage these tools to be the economic engine to drive economic justice forward. And not say that we are, again, not for development. We want to see development happen, but we want to see it done in an equitable way, because that's how we create jobs. That's how we create opportunities to increase the income levels, stabilize the neighborhoods that I think and hope will have a positive impact on the St. Louis Public Schools outside of just the additional revenue. We can talk dollars and cents, but it's really about impacting these neighborhoods that create that environment, that safe environment for our youth when they show up to school every day, which is critically important. And also ensuring that they have the adequate resources to be successful when they show up to the classroom and in the classroom. So excited for the partnership and very thankful for your hard work as well, Alderwoman Boyd.
And also, I don't think people realize something has been happening with SLDC and SLPS that has never really happened before. They're both at the table having conversation. So I applaud SLPS because they came to the table and now they are partnering to be educated on both ends. So, and I think the biggest problem in our city is no, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand doing. So communication is horrible in our city. And so I think it's a good thing that now they have the St. Louis Public School Board at the table with SLDC. And so now they are conversating and making the needs known. And so both parties understands where they are. So thank you all.
Thank you, Alderwoman Boyd. And I completely agree with you. I think that what we're seeing now, sort of this new partnership, new alliance between SLPS and SLDC is a really good start. It's not something that we've really seen as a city before. And I look forward to seeing how this partnership develops and becomes deeper and more perhaps even institutionalized as we move forward to make sure that, regardless of who is the head of SLDC, regardless who is on the school board or is the superintendent, that we have a strong partnership between SLPS and SLDC in the city, and that there's also this understanding about the impact that development, both good and bad, can have on our public school system. So I thank you so much for coming before us today and sharing some of the progress that you're making. I look forward to hearing more as we move forward. My understanding is that we do have somebody from SLPS, Dr. Banks, who is also going to share some remarks with us as well. And so I would like to transition over to hear from the school district before opening it up for public comment.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Evans, Chair Green. We want to thank the Board of Aldermen, the Education and Youth Matters Committee on behalf of our Superintendent, Dr. Kelvin Adams. My name is Nicole Williams. I serve as the Chief of Staff to Dr. Adams, and I deeply apologize on behalf of Dr. Adams. He was called to another meeting. He stayed as long as possible, and we have a meeting this afternoon with our principals across our district. So we're honored and privileged to be here this afternoon. I want to extend a thank you, a heartfelt thank you to Mr. Richardson, just a very thoughtful presentation this afternoon. So thank you very much for sharing your remarks on this subject matter this afternoon. We are honored to participate in this very thoughtful conversation. I do want to take a moment to recognize our board members who are on the call. Dr. Roberts, our board president, Mr. Davis, our board secretary, is on the call this afternoon. I see cheers and applause. Ms. Cousins, who is on the call with us, and Ms. Sonier, who they serve as our board members, and we are honored and privileged to have such a thoughtful, intentional board focused on the pursuit of excellence in this work. I do want to also recognize Mr. Michael Jones, who is on this call this afternoon. He serves as our municipal liaison to the Board of Education. And so thank you, Mr. Jones, for being here. So we are privileged, we are honored, and we are humbled to participate in this very thoughtful conversation this afternoon. Thank you once again to Mr. Richardson and to all of the members of the SLDC. And I do want to take a moment to recognize and thank Mayor Jones for her thoughtful work and for ensuring that we are included in the conversations as we move forward. I want to recognize our speaker this afternoon. Ms. Angie Banks serves as our Chief Financial Officer, very, very focused on how we ensure fiscal integrity and fiscal stewardship in our district. And so I'm honored and privileged to introduce Mrs. Angie Banks, our Chief Financial Officer. Angie also serves as a TIF Commissioner. And so she is the right person to enter the conversation this afternoon in this very thoughtful forum. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm going to turn it over to Angie Banks, our CFO.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. I'll just note that I'm also a city resident and the parent of two St. Louis Public School graduates. We do want to commend the Education and Youth Matters Committee for having this conversation today and inviting us to testify. Also want to commend the administration's examination of decades-old policies on how to incentivize development in the city, as noted in the recent Post-Dispatch article. So we want to thank you for your willingness to include us as participants in this important discussion. And as noted, we want to thank the Board of Aldermen and the administration for their willingness to participate in the district's citywide planning effort as members of the ad hoc citywide planning committee. It is our objective through an inclusive public process to develop a plan that creates a roadmap to a 21st century public system that will facilitate the ability of the children of St. Louis to reach their full potential, and a system that will be an important part of the public infrastructure that can and will support the City of St. Louis long-term revitalization. St. Louis Public Schools obviously has an interest in how the city uses tax revenues to incentivize development. We recognize these incentives are an important tool in the city's ongoing challenge of developing and revitalizing St. Louis. It has been in the past and will continue to be in the future. We know that it's not our job to tell you how to do your job, but as a major stakeholder and public partner, we think it's important that we share our perspective on this so that you'll be able to take it into consideration as you develop policy, both strategically and tactically, on the use of development incentives. So with that in mind, we think the most important thing to emerge in this examination of redevelopment is the active rethinking of what defines public benefit. Our position would be that the projects in and of themselves are not public benefit. The projects should produce a public benefit, something in the social ecosystem, something that the city should be better because of the projects. That's the essential question to be asked and answered whenever we're diverting public resources to private projects. We don't believe there's a single or simple answer to the question of what is the public benefit. We know all projects are different in both their composition and scale. In fact, if we had to critique the past city development incentive policy, it would be more of a cookie cutter approach in the use of incentives. Let me also add that we at St. Louis Public Schools are really looking at how we need to retool as an organization to be an effective stakeholder and a good partner with the city as we all move forward in the critically important work of creating a vital and vibrant future for the city of St. Louis and its children. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. I will open it up for questions from members of the committee if there are any questions. Start with Alderwoman Ingracia.
No questions. Thanks so much, Madam Chair.
Alderwoman Evans.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I thank you very much for that presentation and that information. You know, I want to make sure that this question, you know, I want it to be as clear as possible. Would you say that you as St. Louis Public Schools feel like you are now involved and are being asked how everything is affecting you, and that you know that you are being listened to when you give that opinion?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I can't express how incredibly excited I am after being a TIF commissioner and being with the district for almost 15 years. I feel like we have finally reached a point that this is almost a revolutionary change in our partnership. So we are extremely excited and feel like we are at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. That's my only question. I really appreciate that answer.
Wonderful. Alderman Stevens.
No, Madam Chair, I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Alderman Page.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions at this time. Thanks so much.
Not a problem. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing those remarks. And I appreciate Alderwoman Schweitzer's question, and again, am just very enthusiastic for the future and seeing this new partnership really come into play, and I think a new understanding of how development and how education really are so intertwined in our city, and I think that as we move forward, if we continue to hold those two things true at the same time, that we need development and we need quality investment in education, and finding that right balance to ensure that today's kids have the resources they need, not just kids in 10 years or 23 years having the resources that they need. I think that this is a positive development for our city. And so I very much am looking forward to seeing the evolution of this partnership and what that looks like, and how the Board of Aldermen can be engaged in this process, and ensure that as a body we are also actively involved in supporting SLPS. I did see for a second, I think, a hand raised from Dr. Roberts. There she is. So Dr. Roberts, I will now recognize you to speak on behalf of the school board.
Thank you so much, Megan, and seasoned greetings to the complete body before us. The board absolutely applauds and supports this visionary approach that has been put forth by our mayor, Tashara Jones, and Mr. Richardson specifically at SLDC, to bring us to the table at the very beginning of the process. I continue to be inspired every time I hear Mr. Richardson present on behalf of SLDC. And lastly, I also like to applaud the Board of Aldermen. Our board appreciates your advocacy, and we also appreciate your support of the moratorium and your participation in the citywide plan. Thank you.
Not a problem at all. Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts, for sharing those remarks. Are there any other members of the school board or from SLPS that are looking to speak today? If not, I will move on to public comment at this time. All right. Well, thank you so much for attending. The first member of the public that I have to speak today is Lauren Ray Preston.
Hi, I'm here.
Wonderful. I do need to just swear you in real fast. Do you commit to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Wonderful. You may proceed.
Okay. Hi, I am a parent and I am also a former teacher in St. Louis Public. And I'm coming today to just sort of make a plea to anyone who has the ability to put more funding into St. Louis Public Schools. I have a lot of people ask me when I bring up complaints about St. Louis Public, well, why do you have your children there? And first of all, I want to say it's because I value public education and I value diversity and I value what St. Louis Public brings to the table in terms of what they're teaching children. Secondly, I can't afford to move. I can't afford private education. And I live in the city and we're committed to staying here. I wanted to talk very briefly about my daughter who's at a neighborhood school. She has autism, selective mutism, which means she doesn't speak to most individuals in the school. And she has not done so in the 4 years that she's been at the same school. And she also has been recently diagnosed with dyslexia. And the way that a lack of funding impacts her is pretty significant. There aren't enough special education teachers to meet with her one-on-one, even though she doesn't speak in front of other children. There are not enough classrooms for the special education teachers to break out into small groups so that there aren't several groups meeting at the same time with lots of noise and distractions. The reading specialists, because we've only recently been able to get reading specialists through specific funding during the pandemic recently, the limitations on the funding means that the reading specialists can't work with students who are kindergarten through second grade. So there's no reading specialist that my child has access to on a regular basis. There's no regular nurse at my child's school during a global pandemic because of a lack of funding. And anyway, most of the teachers and reading specialists end up subbing on most days because there's a lack of substitute teachers. And while we could say this is a national crisis, we have to acknowledge that we're in a state where we are 49th in the nation in funding for education. And more specifically, if we can't look to the state of Missouri to resolve our issues, I would request that we do for our own and that we come up with funding schemes that are sustainable and equitable for the city of St. Louis. The state of Missouri can decide that it doesn't value children and it doesn't value education, but I know in the city of St. Louis, we value both. And I'm asking that we make decisions moving forward that are good for children and not good for corporations necessarily. I'm not a business person, so I can't speak to what the but-for type of rules are, but I can make this plea and ask for help specifically for my child who doesn't know all her alphabet letters in the middle of first grade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that testimony. I really appreciate you coming today.
Thank you.
Next up is Emily Hubbard.
I'm here.
Hello. Do you commit to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
You may proceed.
I am similar to Lauren. My children are in SLPS. I have 2 at a neighborhood school and 2 at McKinley. And I will once again talk about their inequity between the gifted schools and the regular schools, even though that's not the point, but I want people to hear it, that it's not right. I would like to know why we're negotiating with people who don't love us. I am not a business person, but are there businesses who want to be in the city, who want to help us? Is this possible? It feels, the Butler brothers, they're not from St. Louis. The profits that they get are not going to come back to our kids. And so it feels like we're extracting profit from our kids for the profits to go to people who don't live here and don't care about us. And I guess more development is good, but moral implications of it don't sit well with me. I would really like if we could figure out a way for someone else besides our school kids to sacrifice especially today, I saw that 14% of all the homeless kids in Missouri are in SLPS, and that is 20% of the SLPS student body. So we have the most vulnerable kids, and we're asking them to, I mean, we're not asking, we're just saying, sorry guys, we really need this fancy building. And maybe we do, but I need the city to, and I know y'all are doing better, but I need the city to love and care for our schools now, because in 10 years, we'll maybe have one kid in St. Louis public schools, unless she graduates sooner. I'll have a 12th grader. Yes, I'll have one kid left out of my 4. And like, we need to invest in the schools right now instead of investing in the corporations so that they can be good later. People are leaving the city. First, there was white flight. Now the Black families are leaving. If we don't do good things for the schools now, there might not be students in the city once that investment comes through. And it's just really hard to sit and listen to all the business talk and think about all the struggles that I see at our neighborhood school. And one other comment is that I would really, 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 when you talk about affordable housing, is it affordable housing for families? Can a family that has 4 kids live in your affordable housing? We moved to Carondelet from Dutchtown. We wanted to stay in Dutchtown, to be in our neighborhood with our neighborhood school. We have 4 kids. It was so hard to find a house that was not slummy or not too fancy that our family could live in. And we ultimately had to leave our neighborhood. And so when you say affordable housing and you're talking about taking money away from school children and putting it towards affordable housing, it needs to be for families with children. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Next up is Phyllis Allen. Is Phyllis here? All right, then our last person is Jennifer Elam.
I'm here. Sorry, getting on my technology.
That's all right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
You may proceed.
Let me turn this off. Okay. So I would really like to applaud your committee for taking this kind of matter on, and also for setting aside time in your meeting for public testimony. I'm here as an 18-year resident of the city of St. Louis, a current resident of the 18th Ward in the Covenant Blue Grand Center neighborhood, and as the parent of 2 boys who've been attending SLPS for 7+ years. Our city clearly has a lot of issues with vacant land, vacant and crumbling residential and commercial building stock, some over 140 years old. There's a need and value to regenerating old buildings and building new ones on vacant land, especially in North City and parts of extreme South City. And there's an excitement to seeing some of these projects come to fruition and change the landscape of an area. Personally, a lot of the major projects are actually in my neighborhood. City Foundry is nearby, and IKEA, and some of the new ones, the Target that's coming, are all in my neighborhood, and it's exciting. However, the development in the last 10 to 20 years, continuing to now, even this year, has been largely focused on areas in the Central Corridor that are already booming, already garner the highest rents, and have already more affluent commercial population and residential population. In spite of all these advantages, that impact the future profitability to developers, nearly every major building project in the Central Corridor during this time has been approved for significant tax incentives. And even though I know a lot of math was done on them at the time, when you look a few years later and you see what happened, you see kind of a different picture than the picture that was laid out before those were approved. Often these developments are given a whole menu of incentives: sales tax incentives on construction materials, real estate tax abatement, personal property tax abatement. And it's all at the expense of city residents, especially for kids in SLPS who depend on city tax funds for a significant part of their learning budget. I applaud the progress and the approach that SLDC has begun to take in the last year, but I'd like to urge a few more changes. One simple step is something that they do in Kansas City, is that they cap tax incentives at 75% of the overall 100% tax rate. So just down the street, the Jesuit building is getting 99% tax abatement. And it's at the corner of Grand and Lindell. It seems a little excessive. So I think over-the-top incentive to developers really need to stop. And some of that could be, some of that could be attenuated by actually having people at SLDC, a representative of SLPS or a parent of an SLPS child at SLDC reviewing projects as they come through. The tax, I've been to the TIF commission and testified there a couple of years ago when we were all in person. But in that, Angie Banks was there as a representative, but she hardly said anything. And I had to get up as a parent of SLPS and said, this is ridiculous. You guys are approving ridiculous things for companies that don't need it. And at the time, that the Square initiative was up there. So I just think there needs to be more representation of the people who are affected, and not just people who have kind of a either a position in the game that is tied to the development or tied to the to the city employees that are or creating development. Just an outside person that is going to be affected to person or people to kind of bring the reality check there the entire time. And then I would just like to overall say that, I think explaining, having more open discussion, open numbers that can be reviewed, I think would really help the public feel good about how development is done in the city. When things are kind of under the table, you assume the worst, unfortunately. And when it's going to affect your kid, you start to get mad about it. So anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I appreciate that there is conversations happening more than there used to be, but it's not enough because we are on the rails, and in SLPS especially. I think the city is on a we're getting there, but I think SLPS right now is getting attacked from a lot of sides. So we need to be careful about this. And thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you so much for taking the time. At this time, I'll take any closing remarks from any one on the committee who would like to say anything. Alderwoman Ingracia.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate, as always, the public taking time out of their schedules to testify. It does mean a lot to us to hear from folks. And so I know everyone has busy schedules and things going on, and really value you setting aside some time to let us know your thoughts.
Thanks. Alderwoman Evans. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you very much. I echo the comments of Alderwoman Ingracia. Thank you to everyone who spoke and took the time out of their day to come and testify before us.
Alderman Stevens.
Yes, I would like to echo my colleague in thanking the members of the public for speaking, as well as for Director Richardson and his office for being here as well, and the Board of Education. I do believe, as I told a WashU graduate social work class last night, that we use data to inform our decisions, and it's our role as the elected officials to continuously seek out the humanity within the data and the humans behind the data, which I believe Mr. Richardson's office has done an admirable job of doing. So for the members of the public that are still here, I do want to say thank you for participating in this. It is so integral to a healthy democracy, to a healthy conversation, and to a healthy city. We ask ourselves, how are we going to bring St. Louis back? There's no one answer, but this is one of the answers. So thank you to Madam Chair for hosting this meeting. Thank you for all the speakers, and thank you for all of our civil servants who collectively help to work and make St. Louis a bit better. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to Alderwoman Evans. I see you're there now. Did you have any closing remarks?
Yes, I'd just like to thank everyone that participated in this meeting today. I've learned some things, new things, and I'm just grateful to see that we're working together. The SLDC as well as SLPS, we're working together, and I'm getting a better understanding of the roles that each of those play. And I just want to thank everyone that contributed to this meeting.
Thank you. Alderman Page, any closing remarks? Right, I had to step away. Are there any members not on the committee that would like to make any last remarks? Oh, is Alderman Page back?
Yes, I am, and thank you. I just arrived at 15:20 for my next meeting. Very insightful meeting. Appreciate all the testimonies, very informative. Thank you. And with that, I'm hustling up the elevator.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alderman. Any members not on the committee, if you'd like to say something, just raise your hand. Alderwoman Rice.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I think this was a really important conversation today, and I thank everyone who participated in it. I did have, I guess, sort of a question, maybe just a way that we can get involved, but with the economic justice development plan, if there are ways that we can be helping get that word out, if there are community meetings where staff is willing to come and talk. I know some of the best outreach that I've seen has, revolved around actual in-person conversation and not just, survey responses. So if there's any way that we can help get that word out, neighborhood associations, I know we had a lot of really good distribution through neighborhood associations for our, the ward redistricting plan. So if we can use that, get that word out that way. Some of these folks have really good email distribution list, that kind of thing. So however we can help, let us know, what your deadlines are, and if we can help host conversations, that would be great. And also just to SLPS, thank you for continuing to show up and for making these asks, right? We are grateful for SLDC, really taking this seriously, taking our schools seriously, and taking your input seriously. And just an encouragement to SLPS to keep asking for more. It's time to keep asking for more, and we can support you in those asks. So thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderwoman Rice. And I will go back to Director Richardson for a moment.
No, I just wanted to thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak today. And again, as SLDC looks to be as transparent as possible through this process. I think as people have greater education, information, and understanding of how the process and many of these very intricate tools work, I think that just provides greater clarity for conversation of seeing how some of the sausage is made. And to Alderwoman Rice, your comment around community outreach on the Economic Justice Action Plan, we will be reaching out to the full Board of Aldermen, setting up focus groups, but also diving in deeper with your particular constituents in various wards. So expect an email coming directly from SLDC to the Board of Aldermen to set up some of those focus groups to garner feedback. We don't want to also compensate and spend too much time on over engagement of things that we've already done previously. We know we just rolled out the Equitable Economic Development Framework, which was extensive community engagement work, and we use some of that input. But the idea is to take that a step further and get more granular on the specific actions that we can take. So we will be doing outreach to community members and community-based organizations, but again, it's not just for the sake of creating new focus groups, it's to really get to the specific actions within that framework that we can move forward with. I would definitely like to appreciate and thank the individual parents and staff and teachers that testified today on behalf of their children. They are the heart and really the voices that we're aiming to elevate through these conversations that I take with me and my staff takes with us into these conversations with developers. As you know, I really think about the impact, not just 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but how does this impact the students today? And that's why it's really important for us to communicate that we're not taking any dollars off the current tax roll. We're not offering 100% tax abatements, but any dollar that is increased in value for that project ultimately will impact the city today in the form of whether it's community benefit, public benefit, but also from a fiscal and a revenue perspective. That's very important for me and for my administration here in our vision for economic justice, but then also being more proactive on development in areas that have not seen investment. So again, as we speak to over 59% of the city's geography is considered low-income census tracts or qualified census tracts by HUD, that we have to be more proactive in marketing those areas, changing the narrative about North City, areas of Southeast St. Louis City, that they deserve strong development. Their commercial corridors need to be developed. They need accessible housing, stable home ownership in these neighborhoods. And that's what we're working towards every day. And it requires specific and intentional attention on those areas and investment in those areas, while also serving the full city, because SLDC does serve the entire city of St. Louis. But how do we make the development that happens in our central corridors, our downtown areas, work for the entire city? And then we all come together and we win together. So that's the message that I would like to leave with the committee today. And again, very appreciative of the partnership and the engagement of SLPS and the Board of Aldermen as we look to improve our equitable development principles as we move forward. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for coming before us today. I think that this was a great conversation. Hopefully for members of the public that are working also started to help break down some of these concepts. I know that, development funding can be very complex. The way that it works with and associates with education funding can be very complex. And I think part of our roles as public servants, as elected officials, needs to be to break down some of this information and make it easier for the public to understand, so that the public can be equipped in pushing us to make better decisions on behalf of city residents and in behalf of kids in our city. So I thank everybody who has come out today. Are there any announcements from anyone on the committee? I do have one quick announcement that I said that I would make for Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Coming up on December 10th from 5 to 7 p.m. there is a talent showcase at the Boys and Girls Club. It's the Teen Center at the Teen Center of Excellence, located at 9200 West Florissant. And if you have any more questions or want to get involved with it or attend, feel free to contact Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, and she will link you up on getting involved with this activity. So Alderwoman Ingracia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to mention to members of the board that the Board of Education will be hosting an informational session on their legislative priorities at 9 a.m. at Carnahan High School this coming Saturday. You should have an email from the clerk, and then maybe through other avenues. I would really encourage you to attend if you can. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alderwoman Ingracia. Moved on to excused members. I will excuse the Alderwoman from the 14th Ward today for necessary absence. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Previous rule.
Hearing no objections to previous rule, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.